From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast series. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues and developments. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views. Today, we are continuing our series focused on the sustainability credits, which were included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Joining us again is Karl Obradovich, who leads Deloitte's global credits and incentives practice in the U.S. And we're joined by Gary Hekimovich from Deloitte's Washington National Tax Group. And in particular today, we're going to go a bit deeper on Section 48C, which is the Advanced Energy Project Credit, and are going to focus on some recent guidance from the IRS, which very importantly establishes some timelines for qualifying for the credit, with key deadlines that organizations that wish to take advantage of the credit will need to be aware of. So Gary and Karl, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Carrie. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Gary. And I will start with you, Karl. We've talked before about the Advanced Manufacturing Credit. It's one of the four core clean energy credit buckets that we've discussed under the IRA before. So what is the program goal around the Section 48C Advanced Energy Project?
Thanks, Carrie. So let me start by setting the stage and provide a quick overview of the 48C credit. It's an application-based credit through the Department of Energy. The credit is up to 30% on eligible capital investments in projects that either re-equip, expand, or establish an industrial or manufacturing facility for certain clean energy property or greenhouse gas reducing equipment or critical minerals. The credit is reduced to 6% if prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are not met. And the initial guidance for prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements was issued at the end of 2022. So let's talk about the program goal. The goal for 48C is to expand U.S. manufacturing capacity, to increase quality jobs for clean energy technologies, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the industrial sector, and to secure domestic supply chains. Under the IRA, the IRS is directed to allocate $10 billion. So $10 billion tax credit allocation. $4 billion is to be allocated to projects located in an energy community. This credit is reinstated from 2009, which had a $2.3 billion allocation. So at $10 billion, the tax credit allocation under the IRA is more than 4 times the amount that was allocated in 2009. So during the prior round, 2009, allocations were between $75,000 and $155 million. So small and large investments can be awarded for the 48C credit.
And as I mentioned, there is some new guidance. Tell us a little bit about that.
On February 13th, 2023, the IRS issued Notice 2023-18. This notice established the 48C credit program to allocate tax credits to qualifying advanced energy projects. A few things was included in the notice. One, it told us that there's going to be multiple rounds. So we talked about $10 billion of funding. Well, in round one, there'll be $4 billion tax credit allocation and approximately $1.6 billion to be allocated to projects located in an energy community. Secondly, the notice told us that there'd be additional guidance coming by May 31st. So we know that there's certain things that will be included in that guidance, such as more details related to what will be included in a concept paper, which I'll talk about here in a second, more information on the application deadline and what the application process will look like. So more guidance coming by May 31st. The third thing it told us was the concept paper deadline. So for taxpayers to participate, they must submit a concept paper. And that concept paper must be filed between May 31st, 2023 and July 31st, 2023. So to participate in round one, a concept paper must be filed no later than July 31st through the Department of Energy. Companies should assess if they have plans to make capital investments in one or more of their manufacturing and industrial facilities satisfying the eligibility requirements.
And Gary, you worked on the Section 48C applications during the 2009 round, as well as others here at Deloitte, as well as then it spilled over into another 2013 round. Based upon that past experience, how would you identify an eligible project?
Thanks, Carrie. Well, I barely survived the application season in 2009, 2013. These are quite extensive applications to be filed with the DOE, but eligibility has really changed. So back in 2009 and 2013, when this 48C was originally put in the code and Congress set aside $2.3 billion as opposed to $10 billion, there's really a focus on just one of three, what qualifies under the new credit, three buckets. It was really previously just the first bucket, and that is companies that are engaged in the manufacture of, I'll call it green widgets. It's really any project that establishes, expands, or re-equips a manufacturing facility in the U.S. that produces components, raw materials, really anything that's part of the clean energy ecosystem, where what is produced eventually downstream is utilized in a manner that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if that sounds broad, it is broad. This first bucket and category under the new 48 Cap C, the new $10 billion that's available, and as Carl said, $4 billion available immediately in this first round, goes beyond just that category itself. It also includes recycling projects. So if you have an industrial facility that recycles any of these components, property that was originally manufactured and used as part of the clean energy ecosystem, the recycling or manufacturing can qualify. That's the first bucket, and that's a very broad bucket. The second bucket, which never applied in prior rounds of 48 Cap C, is greenhouse gas emission reduction projects. So think in terms of, when we talk with clients about ESG, there's a real focus on reducing your carbon footprint in both your vendors and your own industrial facilities. So the second category is brand new, and it applies to re-equipping in an industrial or manufacturing facility with equipment designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. Now, when you think about that, the idea is much broader than just pollution control equipment at a facility. We expect the guidance when it comes out will be more of a life cycle analysis. And that's why recycling older components and having suppliers that have incorporated greenhouse gas emission reductions will make sense as well. So the second category itself is new and very broad. The third category is critical material projects. So these are projects that re-equip, expand, or establish an industrial facility for the processing, refining, or recycling of critical materials. And that includes critical minerals. From prior calls, you might recall that there's 50-some critical minerals that were identified in prior legislation and included in the Section 45X manufacturing credit that focus on making sure that the United States has processing activities with respect to these critical minerals, which are often used in the clean energy economy. Those 50-some critical minerals are also qualified under this 48 Cap C credit. So if you have a facility that is processing any of those critical minerals, certainly chemical companies have to look at this very closely, then you can qualify for a 48 Cap C credit as well. Keeping in mind that the 48 Cap C credit is an investment tax credit. So it's based on your CapEx expense in equipment that's going to be used in the U.S. to process these critical minerals.
So it's definitely a much more expansive list of types of projects that could qualify than we saw in the prior rounds. And I think it's interesting that it is expanded to those projects where you're taking in a manufacturing facility and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because we know lots of companies are focused on that. So that's very interesting to hear. Gary, maybe talk a little bit then about how the Department of Energy is going to decide which projects will be able to move forward.
Yes, that's the big important thing is, well, how do I get to these 48 Cap C credits? So in the guidance that came out that Carl mentioned, it sort of provides half the story. It tells you the process that is going to be undertaken to award $4 billion of the $10 billion set aside. The first $4 billion are round one. And the key deadline, as stated in that IRS notice, is July 31. So from the period May 31 through July 31, the government will be accepting concept papers. A concept paper, at least in prior rounds, and we don't have the details of what's going to actually be required in a concept paper, but we can use prior rounds as a good indicator. A concept paper in prior rounds was a 10-page document, essentially an executive summary of the selection criteria that the DOE will have to look at and evaluate whether Project A should get the nod over Project B. Those concept papers are due again by July 31st. If you file and one other thing to note, there's no advantage by filing earlier. It's just the deadline is July 31, so there's no advantage to filing on June 1 as opposed to July 31st. But the idea here is that the government will take the concept papers, will review those concept papers, and then provide a letter of encouragement or discouragement from a full application. Now, that's different than prior rounds. In prior rounds of 48 Cap C, the government would do a review, but solely for just basic eligibility requirements, that you've met the statutory requirements, period. No sort of judgment as far as encouraging or discouraging. So it'll be interesting to see when the additional guidance comes out in May, just what procedures the government's going to undertake, the DOE, to determine to discourage or encourage an application. Process-wise, once you've been accepted or encouraged to file, the next step will be a full application. The full applications, just to have a sense what they've been in the past, it was 50 pages, capped at 50 pages of documentation, along with appendices that had to be filed. And we had clients that filed, over 100 pages of application. It's quite extensive what has to be filed to secure the tax credit benefits. Selection-wise, there are really three buckets that the government evaluates these projects. And, they'll do an initial review for the concept paper. It won't nearly be as detailed. You don't have to provide nearly the detail for the final selection. But to give everybody a sense of what the selection criteria is, these are the key things the government is weighting. The commercial viability of the project, domestic job creation, technological innovation and commercial deployment, the greatest impact on airborne pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. So the reduction, there's actually a spreadsheet that the government had in prior rounds where you fill out, you make some assumptions, the government provides a methodology to apply those assumptions, and then you determine really on a dollar per dollar investment how much greenhouse gas emission reductions you expect from the investment that the client is asking the government to fund under this investment tax credit. So that's a really important factor in determining this, the reduction of energy consumption costs and greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, the project timeline. So the government would prefer to fund things that are going to be more shovel ready, a shorter timeline. Those are just the statutory selection criteria. There's a number of program policy factors. And think of these as things where the government has discretion, the DOE. They generally want to disperse the allocation more widely from a geography standpoint. Think in terms of congressional districts. You don't want to send all of the funding to one particular congressional district or state. So diversity of geography is important. There's a real focus in allocating these credits to energy communities. Those are areas that are transitioning from a fossil fuel economy to a clean energy economy. Diversity of technology, diversity of project size, regional and economic development outcomes. Will this spur further investment? These are all things that are taken into account, including the utilization of other DOE state and local financing assistance programs. All of those get mixed in selecting what is a good project. So that should give you a sense. There's a number of additional factors, but those things will be spelled out in greater detail in the final guidance that comes out.
Well, there's certainly a lot to consider there. So Carl, maybe you can tell us, how is Deloitte helping companies that have plans to make capital investments in one of these manufacturing areas, which hopefully will qualify for Section 488C? How are we helping those types of companies?
Gary mentioned that he was part of that team during the prior round. Our team includes a diverse set of professionals with experience drafting and preparing 48C applications. This includes engineers, cost segregation professionals, accounting and legal backgrounds, credits and incentives professionals. Gary outlined some of the criteria that we expect will be in the concept paper. It takes a lot of different types of information. We need to talk with different stakeholders at the company to be able to prepare a powerful, compelling story to be able to submit to the Department of Energy. So it's important that taxpayers are starting to evaluate and assess now if they have an opportunity, if they're making investments that would be eligible for the 48C credit. And with the July 31st deadline, clients really need to start that assessment now to try to make sure that they're able to gather their information and be able to complete the concept paper prior to the deadline.
Absolutely. July 31st is just around the corner, just given the level of detail that we're expecting that needs to be included. Well, thank you, both Carl and Gary, for sharing this important information. And I'm sure we're going to talk again once additional guidance comes out. In the meantime, if our audience wants more information, you can reach out to me or Gary or Carl directly via LinkedIn. You can also go on Deloitte.com and search around Inflation Reduction Act incentives or sustainability. Lots and lots of materials there. But as always, thank you, audience, for listening in. We hope you all continue to be well and look forward to speaking to you again in the future.